This represents the East India Company killing the goose that lays the golden egg, because in 1774, having twice taxed Bengal dry, picked it to the bone, there is no money the following year. And the East India Company, when the news arrives that there's no tax revenue receipts the following year at all, the company share price dives. The company tries to get the Bank of England to bail it out, but it needs £4 million and the bank doesn't have it. So they have to go to Parliament. And this, finally, in 1774, is the first moment that this entirely libertarian capitalist organization begins to have the government take it over. And they basically buy about 50% of the shares with their £4 million and take a controlling interest in the company. And from that point, 1774, 174 years after the founding of the company finally becomes a sort of public-private partnership, and then later on becomes more and more a governmental organization. Next slide. Next slide, please. The company finally is, back to the last one. The company continues to operate ever more just a governing corporation. Its monopoly is taken away by Parliament, so other merchant houses set up in Calcutta, but it still is massively unresponsive to the needs of Indians. And in 1857, the Great Uprising, the largest colonial revolt to take place anywhere in the world, takes place in, centered on Delhi. 100,000 East India Company sepoys march on Delhi and put the Mughal emperor back on the throne. And for about a year, it's very touch and go as to whether the company will prevail. But in the end, they do, because they recruit a whole load of Sikh and Pathan mercenaries from the northwest frontier, march down the Grand Trunk Road and retake Delhi in September 1857. They then kill about 100,000 innocent civilians in the reprisals that follow. Next slide. And so vast are these casualties that they're too big to hide. Parliament learns exactly what's going on, and in 1858 votes to roll up the company, to nationalize it, in effect. The Raj begins. But the Raj is only 90 years, 1858 to 1947, while the East India Company is 250 years. It is the much longer period of history, and yet we've forgotten about it. What we remember with British and India is, of course, Kipling, Curzon, Queen Victoria, the Imperial Durbar, lovely similar lawns with Maharajas playing croquet, and all that sort of stuff. What we've forgotten is the much longer period of history when the East India Company is in charge. Next slide. I'm going to end by just showing you the this is the rolling up of the company. Just like the sepoys, rebellious sepoys, if captured, were blown from the mouths of cannon, so here we have East India Company House being blown from a cannon in the cartoon in Punch, and the captions read: nepotism, blundering, avarice, misgovernment. So no one really mourns the East India Company when it's gone. As the Times says, it's rolled up with less fuss than a regional railway bankruptcy. But we have forgotten the corporate nature of the East India Company for most of its rule. It was not the British government that took over India in the 18th century. Much more sinisterly, it was a for-profit corporation that existed for no other reason than to enrich its investors and shareholders. And it did so by asset stripping India, by taking one of the richest countries in the world and turning it into one of the poorest countries in the world. And the great country houses of England and many of the great profits of the 18th century were the fruit of this business. I'm just going to finish by reading, next slide, a quote from the impeachment of Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings actually is one of the least offensive of all the East India Company Governor Generals. He learned Bengali and Persian, was a very cultured man, and it was only the ignorance of Parliament that led to him being the guy that was hauled before Parliament and impeached. But at the beginning of the impeachment, this was what the Lord Chancellor said to the assembled Lords. And I think it's a great epitaph for the company. Corporations, he wrote, have neither bodies to be punished, nor souls to be condemned. They therefore do as they like. Thank you very much.
Okay, so an anonymous attendee asks, can you say more about Mirjafar's history?
Yes, Mirjafar was an Arab who, like many at this period, comes to Mughal India to make a fortune. Mughal India, since the 13th century, had been regarded as somewhere where an ambitious man, an ambitious Muslim man, could make a fortune. And you get a steady migration of educated Persians, particularly, but also the odd Arab coming, and also many Afghans and Central Asians coming to India, hoping to be promoted as administrators or soldiers. And Mirjafar comes from Karbala, the site of the great Shia signs in modern Iraq. He goes to Delhi, and then he finds his way to Murshidabad, where eventually he is promoted by Ali Verdi Khan to his leading general. And during the attack of Siraj ud-Dawla on Calcutta in 1756, it is Mirjafar who leads the attack. But he's illiterate, he's old, he's a bit of a fuddy-duddy. In his youth, he'd been a very brave soldier, but he's now regarded as a slightly second-rate figure. And indeed, his Nawabship is marked by a complete inability to administer, as Clive quickly and rather cynically notes in his letters. And he's replaced eventually by the company, by his son-in-law, Mir Qasim, who's a much cleverer and more formidable administrator and general.
A question from Davina. Was the company involved in slavery?
Not much, because it didn't deal in Africa. There was another company, which several other companies, the Sierra Leone Company and the Royal Africa Company, which was more interested in slavery. I think I've read somewhere that it might have been involved in a small amount of the slave trade between Zanzibar and Ethiopia and India, but only in a small way. The main business was initially spices, and latterly in textiles. But there is, I mean, this is the height. This period of the rise of the East India Company is very much the period of the height of the Caribbean plantation slave trade in the Middle Passage. But it's a different group of merchants operating out of Bristol, in a different company that really runs that horrible trade. Not that the East India Company was any morally much better than the slavers. It was equally ruthless and equally easy with human life. But no, the short answer is it wasn't really a slaving operation.
Which brings us nicely on to the next question. What was public opinion of the East India Company in Britain? Was there no objection to their activities? No,
well, this is one of the more encouraging things I discovered in my research, or certainly it was a surprise to me, how much people hated the East India Company. Not only do the liberal elites in Britain, like people like Horace Walpole, write endlessly about how we have outdone the Spanish in Mexico and Peru. They at least performed their atrocities out of reasons of religious faith. We have done it only for greed. And there is, just like in the 80s, there was a great groundswell of opinion in Britain against the rich merchant bankers and hedge fund managers who seem to be making money with very little effort in the city. So in this period, there's massive dislike of these brutal men who come back from India with fortunes that everyone presumes is gathered by taxing and looting and stripping Indians of their land and property. And there's rather a lot of resistance in the British press. And when the news comes of the Bengal famine and the death of 1 million people, or in some accounts 3 million people, there are plays put on at the Haymarket. Clive is mocked as Lord Vulture, careless of people's lives, or rather totally uninterested in the death of 1 million Indians at his hands. And eventually, Clive is hauled before Parliament and actually ends up cutting his own wrists and is buried in an unmarked grave, which is what makes it even more outrageous that there should be a statue of Clive now standing outside the Foreign Office and behind Downing Street. And significantly, that statue was not put up at the time of Clive. He died in disgrace, mourned by few. It was put up by Lord Curzon in the early years, just before the First World War, more than 100 years after Clive's death, when Clive had been whitewashed and given a new packaging as the founder of the British Empire, the founder of the Raj in India. And it's slightly like the Confederate statues in the United States being put up at the period of the Civil Rights Movement to keep the blacks down. This image of Clive is put up by Curzon to show the Indians their place, in inverted commas. It is a nasty racist statue of a nasty racist man put up in commemoration of his ability to suppress peoples of other races. So I'm a great believer in taking that statue of Clive down. He's not a national hero. He is a ruthless insider dealer, deeply corrupt, a remarkable man, and you know, I greatly enjoyed writing about him. He's my Lord Voldemort. He's brilliantly good at chilling his enemies into submission, whether on the battlefield, in Parliament, or in the boardroom of the East India Company. But he's not a nice man, and he's not someone we should be celebrating today, in my view.
Were there any benefits to India derived from the East India Company?
Very, very few. Most obviously, the East India Company reunified India. I mean, India has been at different times united by the Mauryan emperors, initially the Emperor Ashoka and others, by the great Mughals, by the Guptas. There are many times that people have ruled most of modern India. So it's not like it's a unique achievement of the company. But after the Mughal Empire shattered in the 1740s, it is the company which reunites it and founds the regiments which are the backbone of the Indian army. So many of the regiments founded at this time are still celebrated in Indian army messes, for example, today. There are a few other things. I mean, I, as someone interested in art and archaeology, am very proud of the role of people like James Prinsep, who rediscovered the Buddha, other figures who founded the Archaeological Society of India, who mapped its ancient heritage, translated its languages, and so on. But in general, you know, the company like Facebook or Google did not exist for philanthropic purposes. You know, no one would pretend that Goldman Sachs is there to do the world a favor. Quite clearly, Goldman Sachs is there to make profit for people that invest in Goldman Sachs or who work in it. And the same is true of the company. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is I think it's a very clear example of how the British, how we have been conning ourselves about our empire. There was nothing philanthropic about the company. It was a commercial company. It ruled India for most of the period that the British were ruling India. It was, and it, you know, it was there to take Indian wealth and bring it to Britain, which it did very effectively. So I think it's very important that we don't, you know, particularly now that we don't romanticize empire. I'm not saying this out of some sort of misplaced political correctness or some sudden sort of woke rebirth that I've undergone, but having spent 5 years, actually 20 years since White Mughals in 1999, reading the East India Company, and it is, you know, as ruthless as far more ruthless than Jeff Bezos's Amazon or Exxon or any of the great corporations of our day. And it's funny because, you know, we British are very happy. Whoops, sorry, I'm knocking my screen all over the place. We British are very happy to understand very clearly that the Belgian Empire was clearly a wicked, terrible thing that cut off the hands of people that didn't produce enough rubber. We are happy to believe that the German empires were all awful, and obviously the Third Reich was the worst of them all. But when it comes somehow to our own empire, we like to find excuses for it. We like to see it in this great sepia haze of lovely rose-tinted merchant ivory croquet parties on similar lawns with smiling maharajas and handsome elephants, or handsome elephants and smiling maharajas. And we look for things to be proud of and reasons why somehow our empire was better. It frankly wasn't. No empire is built for the benefit of the colonized. Every empire in history, whether it's the Romans taking over the Etruscans, then conquering the Gauls, then conquering the Britons, whether it's Spain going to the New World, all empires are built for the benefit of the colonizer and not for the colonized. And the same is true of our empire in India. And we need to get real about this because we're not taught about imperial atrocities at school. The Irish learned about the potato famine. The Indians learned about Amritsar and the massacres after 1857. Australians learned about the mass extinction of the Tasmanian Aboriginals at the hands of British bounty hunters. We do not learn this stuff in our national curriculum. We learn only the good bits. We learn about William Wilberforce liberating the slaves. We learn about Florence Nightingale looking after poor soldiers. And we don't teach this in our schools. So when Brits go abroad, they have no idea how the rest of the world sees them. And this actually impacts in a very real way on politics every day today. I was in India 4 years ago when Theresa May, or 3 years ago when Theresa May, after the Brexit vote, came to India. And the idea was that we would have what the civil service literally called Empire 2.0. And the idea was we've fallen out with the Germans, we've fallen out with the French. I know what, we're going to go to India, and the Indians love us because of the empire, all those merchant ivory films, of course they love us. We gave them Edwina Mountbatten, it was all a lovely relationship. We go back to them and they will save us after Brexit. But of course what happened was that Theresa May was not going to give any new visas to Indians, and she wasn't going to allow any more university places for Indians. And Narendra Modi on day one said no deal. And I remember having dinner with the vice chancellors who'd been brought out by Joe Johnson at that stage, who was education minister, that evening. And it was like a funeral party. It was like a wake after someone's death. The visit had been a complete disaster. But rather frustratingly, it wasn't really reported. And people, and the British just haven't taken in a sense, how little our old colonies want to have really anything special to do with us. They're very happy to do business with us like anyone else, as long as it's advantageous to them. But the idea that the Indians are longing to give us special status and queuing up to do trade deals with us is pure fantasy. And as we know now, 3 years after Brexit, I think there's been deals with Papua New Guinea and with the Faroe Islands. I can't remember what other. I mean, it's very, very small fry. And the Commonwealth has not come to our rescue. So I would say it's pure fantasy and empire nostalgia that is actually, in a real way, damaging our place in the world. We need, in the words of Robbie Burns, to see ourselves as others see us. And many people in the world see us as angry, expansive, cruel, brutal imperialists. And we need to know that. And we need to moderate our behavior to take that into account.
Let's finish on a question that many people have asked, which is, can you draw any lessons or analogies from the East India Company to the modern day corporate world?
Yes, I mean, and this is one of the points of the book. The East India Company is the first great corporation and the model for many of the corporations today. None of them have private armies, but they have other weapons. Surveillance capitalism. Anyone watching this on their mobile phone is likely to get a stream of East India Company related adverts in their Facebook and Twitter feeds tomorrow morning because they're listening to this conversation. They can hear what I'm saying, and they will send you adverts now related to what you've been listening to. So they are enormously powerful, and history of the company shows that corporations will resist the nation state and its attempts to legislate against them. They have lobbying groups which exist for this purpose. They have the ability to bribe. They provide employment to ex-prime ministers and politicians. And so there's a whole world of interests out there protecting corporations from democracies. The exact nature of the strategies they use and the strategies we must use to bring them into step are changed with each generation. And obviously the methods used by Pitt, for example, to regulate the East India Company will not be applicable to Facebook or Exxon today or Amazon, but the principle remains. So yes, I think the lesson of this book is that we must protect ourselves from these companies which also can enrich us. And obviously, I've emphasized the degree to which the East India Company plundered India, but the benefit went to Britain, and this was Britain's biggest employer. It provided most of the government money, and the British did very well out of it. And corporations today provide the money we live off and the employment we need, but they need regulation. as well. So we've got to find the method and the balance to keep them in check.
William, thank you so much for that fascinating talk. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. The paperback is out. I should do my little sales pitch now. The paperback is out this week, I think coming out tomorrow, if not today. So please go out and buy it. It's a beautiful little book, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.